The Complete American History, Part 4, The American Revolutionary War from 1775 to 1783. All right, so let's just dive a little bit deeper so we can have a firm understanding of who we're fighting against who in this war. So, the American Revolutionary War was primarily fought between Great Britain and the 13 American colonies, which declared themselves the United States of America in 1776. While it began as a colonial rebellion, it escalated into a global conflict involving France, Spain, and the Netherlands against Britain. So, some of the key details regarding the conflict included the combatants. The war was not merely the Americas, okay? It was not just the Americas, as in the whole continent, but specifically the British colonies in North America rebelling against their mother country, Great Britain, okay? So the transition, it began in 1775 as a rebellion within the British Empire and evolved into a war for independence following the Declaration of Independence on July the 4th, 1776. So, allies. Who were the allies? France entered the war as an official ally of the Europeans, of the American colonies in 1778, followed by Spain and the Netherlands. So, what was the outcome? The outcome was that the Treaty of Paris in 1783 officially ended the war, with Britain recognizing the independence of the new United States of America. So it was both a civil war, meaning colonists versus British loyalists, and it was an international war for independence. The Revolutionary War. So the American Revolutionary War did not equally benefit everyone living in America at the time. It was not about ending slavery, not about freedom for African Americans. It was not about helping American Indians. Freedom was limited no matter what. And there were a lot of conflicting interests. So it was not about ending slavery. Slavery continued before, during, and after the war. Many leaders of the revolution own enslaved people. Therefore, they did not want to end slavery. And it was not about freedom for African Americans because enslaved Africans were not included in the rights being demanded. And some were promised freedom by the British instead. So it was not about helping American Indians either. Native tribes were not fighting for colonial independence because many supported Britain to protect the indigenous land from being stolen, to protect the indigenous land from the Europeans expanding what they already stole. So freedom was limited. The ideal of freedom mainly applied to white colonists, to the Europeans. Women, African Americans, and Native Americans did not gain equal rights because of the Revolutionary War. So that's a bit of conflicting information. So different groups fought for their own survival and goals, not a shared freedom. Then what was the war really about? It was about control and power. Britain wanted full control over the colonies, and the Europeans wanted to govern themselves. So no taxation without representation. Colonists, which were the Europeans, were taxed but had no voice in Parliament, and they believed that it was unfair. So, money and debt. Britain taxed the colonists to pay off war debt, and the Europeans resisted paying those taxes. And it was about economic freedom. But wait up. The blunt truth is that the British viewed both groups as strategic assets, not as people they had a moral duty to protect. Their involvement with enslaved Africans and American Indians was based on military cold calculation. For enslaved Africans, they used the weaponized promise. The British did not offer freedom because they were abolitionists. They did it to sabotage the American economy. So property, not people. Lord Dunmar's proclamation only offered freedom to enslaved people owned by rebels. If you were enslaved by a British loyalist, the British generally expected you to stay in bondage. They expected you to stay a slave. So, disposable labor. Most Black loyalists weren't given guns. They were used for grueling manual labor, building fortifications and doing the dirty work of the camps. The betrayal. So, what is the betrayal? When the war ended, the British were inconsistent. While they evacuated thousands to Nova Scotia, many others were essentially returned to slavery or resold by British officers in the West Indies to recoup financial losses. All right, well, that was about the enslaved Africans. So let's dive deeper for the American Indians, which were considered the human buffers. The British viewed native tribes as a convenient wall to keep the colonies from growing too large, too powerful, and independent. Strategic interests. What was it? What was their strategic interest? The British wanted to maintain the fur trade and keep the colonies pinned to the East Coast, where they were easier to tax and control. Protecting Indian land with the Proclamation of 1763 was a way to prevent expensive frontier wars, not a respect for tribal sovereignty. So, now we look at the left behind part. When the British lost, they signed the Treaty of Paris in 1783 and handed over vast amounts, large amounts of native territory, of native land to the Americans. Well, hold up, not to the Americans, to the people who were stealing the land, the Europeans, without even inviting their tribal allies to the negotiation table. So they handed the land over and didn't even consult with the Native Americans. So they effectively abandoned the tribes, the Indian tribes, to face the vengeful colonists, the vengeful Europeans who won in general. So, in short, let's brief this up. The British helped these groups only as long as it hurt the colonists, the American rebels. the colonists, the Europeans. When the war became too expensive, the British cut their losses and left their allies to deal with the consequences. So they left the Indians to just deal with it, deal with whatever happened after that. So they couldn't be relied on either. Crispus Attucks, first person killed in the Boston Massacre in 1770, African and Native American heritage from the Wampanoag tribe, respected sailor and skilled whaler, symbol of resistance against British rule, and he was honored as an early hero of American resistance. What the American Revolutionary War did not do for African Americans. So it did not end slavery in the United States. After 1776, slavery continued in most states, especially in the South. And it did not guarantee freedom or citizenship because most Black people remained enslaved, and free Black people still had very limited rights. So it did not end the slave trade right away. So the United States kept importing enslaved people until 1808, when it was banned federally. But slavery itself continued. This is how long it took for real change to take place. From 1780s to 1804, Northern states began gradual emancipation, slow, not immediate freedom. In 1865, the 13th Amendment officially ended slavery in the United States. That is nearly 90 years later, nearly a century later. A century is 100 years. So 1960s, major civil rights laws finally addressed legal segregation and voting barriers, almost 200 years later. What the American Revolution did not do for American Indians. It did not protect native land or sovereignty. Colonists, the Europeans, still expanded westward after independence. And it did not stop land seizure, land from being stolen. The U.S. settlers, and which was the Europeans, the colonists, and the new government continued taking, stealing native land. And it did not create equal treaties or lasting peace because many treaties were broken or ignored as if it didn't even exist. So it did not prevent future forced removal. This is the question. How long real change took? And is it still ongoing? 1830s, Indian Removal Act led to forced relocation of the Native Americans, like the Trail of Tears. Late 1800s, most Native nations had been pushed into or onto reservations. And in the 1900s till present day, which is 2026, Native American civil rights, sovereignty, and land rights are still being fought for today, after all these years. So here's a brief summary. The American Revolution mainly changed political independence from Britain, not equality within the new country that the Europeans were stealing. For both African Americans and Native Americans, major rights and protections came way later, much later, decades and even centuries afterwards. And some issues are still being addressed today. You are very intelligent, creative learning adventurer. Keep up the great work. Like, comment, subscribe, friends and family. You made it to the end.